When I'm going into a fantasy football draft, one thing I'm trying to accomplish in just about every league is to strike a balance between risk and reward throughout my roster. If I start with some riskier picks early on, I try to find some safety as the draft goes along and vice versa. With that in mind, we're going to take a look at some of the safest players you can draft this season at each of the key positions. We'll start with quarterback. And look, I think there's a lot of value. I think there's a lot of safety littered throughout the ADP at quarterback. We'll talk about some later round guys who make some sense here, but really two names come to mind at the top of the list. The top two quarterbacks off the board in just about every draft, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And look, there's a caveat here for every player we're going to talk about, barring injury. But most of the guys that we are going to highlight do have positive injury track records. That is the case with both Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, especially Josh Allen, who's been really the surest thing in fantasy football since the start of the decade. He's been a top 3 fantasy quarterback in 5 straight seasons, almost never misses time despite playing an incredibly risky, reckless style. The passing touchdowns have varied year to year. The rushing production, especially touchdowns, has varied during that sample. But what we do know is that Josh Allen is going to give you some combination of 40 to 45 total touchdowns and maybe more if he picks up where he left off from a rushing perspective last year. Honestly felt like he could have done more in the red zone, ceded plenty of chances to James Cook and to a lesser degree Ray Davis, but that's beside the point. Nothing has really changed context-wise for the Buffalo Bills. It's still a receiver by committee approach in terms of the pass catching. The Bills have a really favorable schedule this season, despite dominating that division last year. And when it comes to Lamar, basically the same argument. Great team context, great offense, reliable coaching, solid offensive line. Maybe a little more injury concern for Lamar Jackson, giving his history, giving his frame relative to that of Josh Allen. But, we could see some passing touchdown regression for Lamar Jackson at a career high 41 passing touchdowns a year ago. At the same time, Lamar Jackson is still young. So is Josh Allen. Both of them feel like they keep getting better and better every season. So if you're taking that plunge, you're spending an early pick on quarterback, those are the two I'm targeting. Those have been the two most reliable players at the position for several years now. Now, if you're waiting on quarterback, something I tend to do more often than dipping into that tier 1 at the position, there's a slew of quarterbacks who I like this year who go after pick 100. Now, it's a wide tier. It expands probably 2 to 3 rounds. There are 8 or 9 names in that tier, and there is some volatility there with guys like Caleb Williams, Justin Fields, Drake May. You could even say Dak Prescott, given his injury history. But the names that I've come back to are CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert, and Brock Purdy, maybe to a lesser degree, Jordan Love. But those first 3, they're proven really good starting quarterbacks, maybe not elite, but really, really good guys who clearly don't have massive upside in terms of fantasy. But look, if you're waiting on quarterback, you can stockpile a couple of these guys late in the draft, and essentially you're going to get what you signed up for. Now, if you took CJ Stroud as QB5 last year, yeah, that did not work out. He was being way overdrafted. And look, unless you're Joe Burrow, I don't really see a case for a non-running quarterback to go as high as he was. But Stroud is now the QB17. Justin Herbert's the QB15. Brock Purdy, QB14 right now at the NFFC. In that range, again, you're not asking for 23 fantasy points per game. If that's your expectation, you're going to be disappointed. But if you don't get an elite quarterback, you know exactly what you're signing up for. You know exactly what you're getting with these stable starters who go in that 100 to 120 overall range. All of those quarterbacks more than capable of giving you that steady production. Before we get to running backs, just a reminder, go check out everything we offer over at RotoWire.com. Use the promo code YouTube15. You can see it there on your screen. That'll get you 15% off any of our products over at RotoWire. Draft season right around the corner. You can get all of our news, our rankings, our advice, all of our draft tools over at RotoWire. Just use that code YouTube15. Put that in at RotoWire.com. We think you're going to love the new look of the site. We got a new app, everything we're rolling out this football season. So again, YouTube15 over at RotoWire.com. Let's move on to the running back position. Got a few names to highlight here. Derrick Henry. Going in the second round this year, he's finished 4th, 16th, 4th, 1st, 3rd, and 4th in per game production at the running back position over the last 6 seasons. Had one injury-marred season, that was in 2021, missed half the season and still finished inside the top 20 at his position. But other than that 1 year, he has been extremely durable, especially by running back standards and especially given his workload. At some point, that's going to slow down. Henry is into his 30s now, but on the other hand, he's also a complete one-of-one, a complete physical freak. He invests a ton in his body every offseason. He's shown really 0 signs of physical decline at this point in his career. He also plays in what could be the best offense in football. The Ravens should, again, score a ton of points, make a ton of trips to the red zone. There's a reason 74% of their red zone possessions ended in a touchdown last season. That was easily the best mark in the NFL. The one drawback, other than age and mileage, is that Henry, of course, is not a major factor in the passing game. Almost all of his production does come on the ground, but still not enough to scare me away from a guy that you can still get in round 2. Another running back on our safe list, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. So he's played 5 NFL seasons at this point, 4 top 12 seasons, 3 top 10 running back seasons in that span. 2023 was the big outlier, missed 4 games, was playing on a so-so team, we'll say, out in Las Vegas. But we saw last year just how much this Green Bay Packers offense needed and relied on Josh Jacobs. Well over 1,300 yards on the ground, over 300 carries, caught 36 passes, which is fine. We'd like to see a little bit more of that. You remember he was a 50-plus catch guy multiple times in Vegas, so maybe a little bit more upside there as a pass catcher. Now, Josh Jacobs probably doesn't have top 3, maybe not even top 5 running back upside, given the volatility with the pass catching, but as long as he's relatively healthy, and he's missed 7 total games in those 5 seasons, it's going to be really hard for you to take a loss on Josh Jacobs if you're getting him near the end of round 2 or maybe even early round 3 in some formats. You look at some of the other running backs in that range, Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, Chase Brown. I think all 3 of those guys, you could argue, have more upside than Josh Jacobs in a best case scenario. But if you're looking for safety in that round 2, early round 3 running back range, Jacobs is the guy for me. And there's a case for Kyren Williams, by the way, as well, who, of course, fended off Blake Corum all of last season. Sees a ton of usage with the LA Rams. If we go a little bit lower down the board at running back, David Montgomery, he's my safe option if you're looking in that 5th, 6th round range. RB22 right now, finished as the RB18 last year, despite missing some time. Another guy who has a solid health track record. It's not perfect, but he's avoided the major injury. You know, you're never just taking a complete loss on David Montgomery. He is a little less safe this year than he was last year. I will say that. We got questions about the Lions post Ben Johnson, certainly some questions about the offensive line post Frank Ragnow. But even if you're forecasting even a moderate step back for David Montgomery, I think this should still be one of the better offenses in football in Detroit. Montgomery is very touchdown dependent. Did run for over 1,000 yards in 2023. Did that in 14 games, by the way. Would have had a chance to get there last season before the injury, but that is one concern as far as Montgomery goes. He probably needs to get to 10 or 11 touchdowns for you to really feel good about that pick. Honestly, though, the reason that he's on this list is the combination of the acquisition cost and the running backs who go around him in terms of ADP. We're talking Joe Mixon, James Conner, Travion Henderson, DeAndre Swift, RJ Harvey, Aaron Jones, Caleb Johnson. All these guys are either veterans with injury or workload concerns. Some of them, we could see some physical decline. Looking at you, Aaron Jones. And then there's DeAndre Swift, who really just hasn't followed through on any of his opportunities so far in the NFL. And you got a handful of rookies, each of whom could be in a timeshare. So Montgomery himself is, of course, in a timeshare, but we've seen the Lions make that work incredibly effectively now for multiple seasons. He and Gibbs each have their defined role within the offense. Ultimately, Montgomery, a very boring pick, not somebody you're always thrilled to be clicking on, but he's a floor pick and he should provide you with plenty of safety. Let's take a look at some names at the wide receiver position. There's an interesting tier of 3, and all these guys go in the same range in terms of their current ADP. A.J. Brown, Ladd McConkey, and Garrett Wilson. So we're looking at some of those second-round wide receivers. Thought about putting Nico Collins in this category as well. I think he's going to be really safe this year in Houston, but we'll focus on those first 3. A.J. Brown, 4 top 10 fantasy finishes in the last 5 seasons. You know, health is always somewhat of a concern with him, but to me, not significantly more than the average wide receiver. Plays in an elite offense in Philly. Because of that, you know, maybe doesn't have a top 3, top 5 wide receiver type of ceiling, you know, with how effective that Eagles running game is. But to me, still has a really, really high floor for a team that should be very, very good again this season. You know, Ladd McConkey's going into year 2, so we don't have as much of a sample to work with him. Can he top last season? We'll see. I'd like to think he can. Was top 20 in the NFL in team target share last season. You know, not a ton of added competition for him with the Chargers. Mike Williams retired. Trey Harris just signed with the team. Should be there, you know, in time for camp to begin. But obviously a learning curve for any rookie, especially a second rounder. Ladd McConkey's not a burner. He's not somebody that you think of with those huge, you know, highlight explosive type of plays. But he does offer what I would call medium to big play potential. Had 15 catches that went for at least 20 yards last season, 6 catches of 30 plus. At the very least, McConkey should be able to come very close to replicating last year's numbers. Does he take a massive step forward? We'll see. But he is the go-to guy, obviously, in that offense with a very good head coach and a very good quarterback in Justin Herbert. So I think there is some level of safety there. And same goes for Garrett Wilson. You know, it almost doesn't seem right to include him in here, But there is just no competition for targets right now with the Jets. There's plenty of volatility at quarterback with Justin Fields, but say what you want about Justin Fields, he's at least proven he could sustain one high-level fantasy wide receiver early in his career. And the narrative around Garrett Wilson has been mostly negative these last couple of years. Had a disappointing 2023 season. Even last year felt disappointing. Still finished 5th in the NFL in total targets, 7th in terms of total target share. Really, though, the reason that Garrett Wilson is in this safe tier for me is that we've seen him make it work with a variety of quarterbacks, most of them bad. Aaron Rodgers, Zach Wilson, Mike White, Trevor Siemian, Joe Flacco, Chris Streveler, if we want to put him on the list. So even if you have some concerns about Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson is a guy who has proven he can get you 1,000, maybe 1,200 yards, even with poor quarterback play. And again, last year felt like a disappointment. Still finished as a wide receiver 10 overall. Also doesn't miss games. Has not missed a game so far through his first 3 NFL seasons. A couple other receivers who I view as very safe options as you get later in the draft. Wouldn't be a video for me on RotoWire without mentioning Jakobi Meyers, a guy you can often get in the 7th round. I think he still has a really nice floor out there in Vegas. Beats his ADP every single year in and year out. Finally has a solid quarterback. Pretty easily the best quarterback that he's ever played with, in my opinion, in Geno Smith. So, maybe we see the volume decrease. This should be a run-focused team out in Vegas under Pete Carroll with Ashton Genty in place, but you have room here for Jakobi Meyers to regress relative to last season when he finished as the wide receiver 19. He's going as a wide receiver 39 right now, 20 spots after where he finished last year. So even if you think he does take a step back, even if you're not all that interested in Jakobi Meyers and what might be a shaky passing offense. So even if you have questions about the Raiders passing game, if you have questions about the volume, maybe this isn't a team that's constantly playing from behind. They were, I think, 6th in the NFL in total pass attempts last season. I get all that. I think we do see a decline in volume for Jakobi Meyers, but there is such a cushion here for a guy who, again, beats his ADP every single year, going 20 spots after where he finished last year. Even if you think he regresses, he's probably still going to rank higher than wide receiver 39. The last receiver we'll mention quickly here, Khalil Shakir out in Buffalo. You know what you're signing up for with Shakir. That's the case with most of the guys on this list. Should be able to continue giving you that steady 10 to 16 fantasy points every week. He's not going to have the 32-point week, but he's also not going to have the 4-point week. So another guy with just a really high floor, relatively low ceiling. I think the acquisition price for Shakir in the 80s or 90s in most drafts is really fair. There are definitely higher upside guys on the board in that range. Ricky Pearsall, Josh Downs, Jaden Reed, Stephon Diggs. But if you want some security, I think Shakir brings it. That Bills offense is going to be really, really good. Again, a soft schedule this year for Buffalo. I'd like to think that Keon Coleman could be a year 2 breakout, but we have to see that before we write that in pen. Ultimately, in a team that moved the ball around a ton to different pass catchers last season, Khalil Shakir had 32 more catches than the next highest player on the Bills. That was Dalton Kincaid, 45 more than the next true wide receiver. Those were Mac Hollins and Keon Coleman. So still like Khalil Shakir at the most recent price. We'll finish out with the tight end position. A couple names to get to here. We're going with Trey McBride. I think Trey McBride is really safe, even though you're paying a top 3 round price on McBride. The acquisition cost, it does mean that he has to have close to an elite season, but I don't see any reason why he can't do that. Was still the tight end 2 last year, outpaced Brock Bowers on a per game basis, despite not catching a touchdown until week 17. We know this is a position that can be very touchdown dependent. Trey McBride kind of bucks that trend. And look, you have to think there's some touchdown progression coming for Trey McBride this season. Even if he gets to like 5 or 6 touchdowns, that feels like a win after last year. Ultimately, the situation is the same in Arizona. They didn't really add significant target competition. Of course, you're hoping for a step forward from Marvin Harrison Jr., but you're looking at the team target share, 28%. That is elite last season for Trey McBride. That's on par with guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. And again, there's no reason to believe that number will completely fall off this year. The final point on McBride, and the reason I mentioned him and not Brock Bowers, is unlike Brock Bowers, you could get Trey McBride in the 3rd round instead of the 2nd. So even if he were to miss some time, even if something were to go wrong this season, you have a little bit more wiggle room to get your ROI back on that investment. And as we talked about with Jakobi Meyers, you got a new quarterback, you got a new coordinator, you got a new head coach in Vegas. Everything, for the most part, remaining static in Arizona. The next tight end on our list, Evan Engram of the Denver Broncos. So I know he's with a new team, a new coach, a new quarterback in Bo Nix. I wouldn't often call guys switching teams safe players, but I really love the landing spot for Evan Engram in Denver. I think it's a better situation than Jacksonville was last year, even coming into last season when we had some modicum of expectations for the Jags. Engram is going later in drafts this year than he was last year. And that was, coming off of a big 2023 where it felt like he had taken a big step forward. Obviously, he missed time last year, but prior to that, had logged back-to-back 17-game seasons. Has only missed 2 games over the last 4 years, so injury is not a major concern for me. I think Sean Payton is going to completely weaponize Evan Engram in this offense. Outside of Courtland Sutton, there just aren't a lot of proven weapons in that Denver offense. I think Sutton is your number 1. Evan Engram might be a close number 2 in terms of targets this season. I will say there's still plenty of value at tight end after pick 100. It's not like if you don't take Engram there, it's just a wasteland after that. But I'm fine with taking Engram in that range. I'm surprised he's not going a full round higher, if we're being honest. I will say this. I don't think he should be going 30 picks after Sam Laporta. He shouldn't be going well after guys like TJ Hawkinson and Travis Kelce. I think all 3 of those players have pretty similar ceilings to Evan Engram. And again, you're getting Evan Engram around pick 100. The last name on our list, we had to get one more tight end in here. Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers. Now, unlike Evan Engram, certainly unlike Trey McBride, there's going to be more week-to-week volatility with Tucker Kraft, but I like the overall package here a ton. Maybe more appealing in a best ball format, but if you're waiting on tight end, especially really waiting, after pick 115 or so, Tucker Kraft becomes pretty appealing late in the draft. Number 1 in the NFL in yards after contact and yards after the catch last season. You look at this Packers team, not really a clear hierarchy at wide receiver, which can be both good and bad. There's no obvious target hogs ahead of Tucker Kraft, but the Packers also spread it around so much last season that it was tough for any of those guys, receivers or tight ends, to really get a foothold. He had just a 15% target share last season, which is fine. It's not great, but it's fine. Sam Laporta, for what it's worth, was at 16%, so it's not a total killer. Right now, he's going as the tight end 11. You could get him in round 10, round 11, sometimes even later, depending on your league. I think we'll see more consistent passing volume from the Packers this season. That passing game completely fell off a cliff over the second half of last season. I think they know they can't be as run heavy as they were to end last year. So to finish out on Tucker Kraft, I think we see more consistent passing volume from Green Bay this season. Jordan Love was slinging it around early in the year. Injuries started to set in. The schedule softened up. All of a sudden, Green Bay is just riding Josh Jacobs. Jordan Love, had plenty of games where he was throwing the ball under 25 times. I think we see more of that volume. I think a lot of that trickles down to Tucker Kraft. And this is a guy who hasn't missed a game through the first 2 seasons of his NFL career. We'll see if that keeps up, but a good sign in terms of his health early on, which helps push him into safer territory. And I will say with Tucker Kraft, there's more upside here than a lot of the players on the list. Like, he is somewhat of a floor play, but in a best case scenario, there's a world in which Tucker Kraft is a top 5 or 6 tight end this season, especially if you're a big believer in that Packers offense. So I think there's a really nice combination here of affordability, upside, and floor when it comes to Tucker Kraft.